Join us at Glossy's Beauty and Wellness Summit from November 11th through 13th in Napa, California. Influential beauty and wellness leaders will meet to discuss strategies and pain points, discover innovative tech, and ultimately make valuable business connections through one-on-ones and casual networking. For a limited time, we're offering $200 off with promo code GBS24, no spaces. Again, that's GBS24 with no spaces. Go to glossy.co/beauty summit for more information and to secure your pass today.
Hello and welcome back to the Glossy Week in Review podcast. I'm your host, senior fashion reporter Danny Parisi, and I'm here with our international reporter Zofia Zwieglinska. How's it going, Zofia?
Good. Just wrapped up Fashion Week.
You were out at London this season, I believe. How was it?
Yeah, it was busy. There was a lot of events. I find that this seasonality thing always kind of affects the way that the runway is. So like February is really different from September. I feel like this season it was the same.
I don't know if it's like this in the UK, but at New York, it's like February. I always know what the weather's going to be like. And September, who knows? It could be really hot. It could be really cold. I have sweated in line getting into a show at September New York Fashion Week. But today we're going to talk mostly about your experience at London Fashion Week, any of the stuff that you saw. We'll recap the week a little bit. We'll try to keep it focused on London Fashion Week since we did a lot of coverage of New York Fashion Week, but I might bring up some stuff I saw at New York Fashion Week too. And then we'll do a quick preview of some of the things we are currently seeing at Milan Fashion Week, which started this week, and some things we're excited to see at Paris, which starts next week. Let's start with London. So I think it's the 40th anniversary of London Fashion Week this year. There's obviously a lot happening in the British fashion and political environment. Obviously, Brexit is still an ongoing factor. There's the recent election. There's kind of global slowdown in the luxury market. My first question for you, Zofia, is just what was like the mood at London Fashion Week this year? Does it feel optimistic? Does it feel apocalyptic? I don't know. What was the vibe you were getting from the people there?
Well, definitely not apocalyptic. I do feel like people are relatively upbeat. And I think that London in particular is always like the capital which manages to do quite a lot with very little, especially considering like the creative capital that the city has. So it feels like this time, it was a lot of kind of attention on just purely young designers doing their thing.
Yeah. What were some of the shows you went to, and did any stand out?
Yeah, so I I did some backstage and then some runway bits. I think on the backstage side, I really, really liked Halawalia. Like it's a kind of a collection that I love seeing every single time. And this time, Priya, who's the designer behind the brand, showed up with a kind of ode to home collection, which I think is quite interesting considering we're kind of post-pandemic, like that kind of obsession about, domesticity has kind of moved on. But she brought it back to that. And a couple of designers actually references like the living room and the patterns inside it and like the kind of interior side of things. But her collection was very cool. She showed a lot of kind of knitwear pieces. There was some really cool prints, and then a really interesting beading that was inspired by like African beading, I think, at that point. But it was very, very cool. Really enjoyed that one. And then went to Adeline Lee. And that one was also very interesting just because the designer is dressing the Labour Prime Minister's wife, who was in a bit of hot water over the weekend. Apparently there was some budgetary issues. Someone had paid for her wardrobe. And I'm assuming some of those clothes were from the designer as well. But Victoria, who's the Prime Minister's wife, she came to see the whole show as well, which was very cool. It was like choreographed. There was a whole kids collection that was shown at the same time. And there was a dog. So, my fashion week was made at that point. And the clothes were very, very cool. There was a lot of polka dots and it felt very kind of posh uniform, if I had to say that.
I also had a dog experience at Fashion Week, so it sounds like we both got exactly what we wanted out of this season. But the Rachel Antonoff show in New York, Rachel Antonoff and Susan Alexandra, was a fashion show and dog show. Easily the highlight of the whole week was seeing all the rescue dogs being brought out in little outfits, and you could adopt them afterwards, which was really cool.
I saw that. That looked so cool. It was like a kind of dog crafts competition thing, right?
Yeah, it was almost like a faux Westminster dog show type thing. They even had a judge from the Westminster Dog Show like judging the dogs, and then you could adopt them all at the end, which was very fun. I always think it's cool when designers kind of break the mold a little bit and do kind of out of the box stuff. Did any London shows to you kind of do that? Do something interesting or unique beyond just kind of like runway or presentation style?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like London's kind of known for that. Moa Lola's usually the kind of go-to for that. This time, the designer who's apparently singing now, she was basically singing throughout the whole collection presentation, which was at a nightclub, I think. And the whole kind of collection was very focused on like the bags and the accessories. She's very kind of well known for that, as well as, you know, some other formats from other designers. I mean, Ann Kutasaka had a presentation, but she always does something a little bit different. She kind of mashes up sneakers and heels, and it always looks very, very cool. And then, you know, it wouldn't be London Fashion Week without mentioning some of the musical performances that were kind of part of, I guess, part of the Fashion Week, one of them being H&M and Charlie XCX, which was before the official kind of schedule started on Thursday. And technically, you know, not much H&M was shown. However, she was wearing it for the whole performance, and it was a very, very big deal. Loads of people got in, you know, whole load of H&M fans and like previous customers were also allowed into the venue. So the numbers were pretty big. And then the other one was FK Twigs, who partnered with On, and she did a performance as well in I want to say it's like a musical venue / fashion venue called Beams in London. And that was kind of more conceptual. I think she did part of her performance earlier that week in an art gallery as well. So lots of musical bits, weirdly enough.
Yeah, and I was thinking, I think at the Burberry show, not performing, but just in attendance was Damon Albarn of Blur and also Gorillaz. And we have been talking in the Glossy office about it after Brat Summer is Wonderwall Fall, because Oasis is reuniting, and I feel like I feel a bit of resurgence of like Britpop 90s kind of music and also fashion. I don't know. I even think Charlie XCX kind of like calls that to mind a little bit, obviously more poppy. Is that something that's being talked about at all in London? Like, I mean, obviously I know the Oasis reunion is huge, but beyond that, like this kind of Britpop 90s comeback?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely a little bit, especially with Burberry. Although I feel like this season, the collection was slightly less, I guess, tied to those roots. Last season, it felt like it was a lot more kind of connected to the kind of urban culture that Burberry both benefited from and, you know, featured quite a lot in its earlier campaigns, especially around that kind of Britpop, you know, celebrity moment that happened, you know, in the early kind of 2000s. I feel like that's kind of, you know, going to be coming back maybe with some of the other designers if Burberry doesn't end up taking that kind of historical edge to it.
Yeah. And speaking of Burberry, I actually wanted to spend a little time talking about them. Obviously, they're a huge British luxury brand and kind of like a central part of London Fashion Week, but they're an interesting brand to me. I mean, they're kind of like in a rut at the moment. And I just saw in July, they reported that their sales in different regions are down a lot, especially like Asia's down 23%. They dropped off the FTSE 100 because their valuation was too low. Like, I feel like they really needed to kind of do something big at this season's show. Did you get a look at sort of what they were doing? I know there was a big focus on like the trench coat, which is an iconic Burberry look, but I'm always interested to see where Daniel Lee is going to take that brand, especially because it seems like they're in sort of a tough spot at the moment. I don't know. What's your take on that?
Yeah, it was a really interesting collection. I don't think that it has resonated particularly well with the fashion crowd. I'm not sure what that's going to convert to in, you know, with buyers and things like that, because that's usually where that kind of commercial element gets in. Obviously, you know, Burberry has a lot of its own stores, so it will probably be putting a lot of that collection out. But I think that the kind of the muted shades and the kind of parkas over glittery dresses, it didn't have the same kind of impact that maybe previous collections did. And I'm wondering, if that's because of, some of the kind of budgetary issues that Burberry is having, and whether this is going to be something where, it's going to have a long-term impact, and therefore those collections might not be, the most arresting for a while. Like I feel like that's kind of the feeling that I got with the runway this season, with the fact that there was, a lack of its own kind of personal runway. Burberry for the last couple of seasons has been doing things in its own venue. Like it had a dedicated build out in some of the parks. Like it was always a bit of an event. And this season it felt a little bit, maybe not smaller, but definitely slightly less impactful.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. And I think they've been sort of in limbo a little bit. I was reading about how, so they have been, I think, struggling to connect with the sort of like very wealthy, affluent customer. And then this year, they brought in the new CEO, Joshua Schulman, who is American, and he comes from Michael Kors and kind of is known for turning around Coach and sort of focusing on a more affordable, accessible price point for customers and everything. And I think there was a lot of speculation that he was going to do something similar with Burberry, like kind of lead them down market a little bit. There was an interview with him in BOF this week in which he explicitly said they were not going to do that. But like, I don't know, people say they're not going to do things all the time and then do them. So I wonder if that is still kind of, that might be the playbook, is like maybe try to like lower things a little bit. I feel like luxury brands are constantly stuck between like, do we raise prices and focus on that very narrow band of people who can afford it? Or do we try to like lower things, become more accessible, and then risk kind of like diluting the brand? So I don't know. What do you think between those two sort of options for them?
Yeah, I think that, when it comes to luxury brands, the most important thing is, to have that identity. I think Burberry for a couple of, seasons now, if not years, it hasn't really had that. Like, I don't think it has had a signature identity the way it had done, in the previous times. I kind of would liken it to, Victoria's Secret in many ways. Like it had this very, very strong identity at one point, kind of linked to those early 2000/2010 kind of period. And then it basically like it fell off. I think like even before the pandemic, you don't see as many people wearing trenches. It wasn't really as relevant. I think just like that, the amount of hope that was kind of ladled onto, bringing in a new creative director, it kind of suggests that there was a lack of strong identity. And obviously the differences in styling, the differences in the like product concepts between the different creative directors probably didn't help with that as well. Honestly, the stores are like completely different. Like when they were under Tishi, it was completely different store layout. There was these like big beige wall hangings everywhere. Now everything's like white and marble and there's like colorful accessories. It feels very mishmashed. And I think that with luxury brands, you need to have a strong identity that carries through and that, customers, regardless if they're luxury or not, have confidence in. And I don't think that that's happening. I'm wondering if Schulman will be able to bring that back.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. Also, you mentioned something in one of your London Fashion Week stories that I would love for you to explain a little bit more. Can you explain the tourist tax in the UK and why that's like an issue for luxury brands?
Yeah, I mean, I think the tourist tax issue has been going on for a while now. Basically, the issue with tourists coming in and not being able to get the tax rebate, which is what, the tourist tax is, it means that luxury brands are basically losing out to European capitals or, just European cities even, when it comes to those luxury customers who, do shop around, who know that there's, value in maybe going over to a different city so they can save, £200 or something more. It's a real issue that it hasn't been brought back down. And to be honest, at the end of London Fashion Week, there was a kind of party/reception at 10 Downing Street. And again, the tourist tax was not raised as an issue. I'm wondering why, because it does feel like it's something that's affecting that kind of luxury sector in particular. And British brands, tend to rely on that kind of British signature. And therefore, you should get the goods in Britain. And now, customers are going elsewhere to buy those goods.
Yeah, exactly like you said. I feel like it's especially important for luxury brands because they are often catering to wealthy travelers who are coming from the US or from China or just from other parts of Europe. There's like you said, if there's no reason to buy it in London, you might as well just go to like any of the other big European cities that are like right next to it. Anyway, I saw that in one of your stories. I thought that was an interesting point. Last London Fashion Week thing I want to talk to you about, which news just came out this morning. We're recording on Thursday morning, that the British Fashion Council's CEO, Caroline Rush, is stepping down, announced today it's going to take effect, I think, next year. And you had just spoken with her for your London Fashion Week coverage. Is that a troubling sign, or is that just a normal? I mean, she's been there for 16 years. Like, what's your sense of her leaving? Is that signify any like big change, or is it just natural kind of career change?
Yeah, I mean, I would suggest it's probably a natural kind of career change. It's been 16 years. Like, that is quite a long tenure for, any kind of organization, particularly one like the BFC, which is quite unique in the way that it functions. I think the CFDA is kind of focused on American designers and bringing that up, but there's a lot of kind of international conversation that happens within the BFC. There's a lot of, lobbying, logistical framework building. Like, it's a kind of very specific organization. I'm wondering who will be able to kind of step into Caroline's shoes and run that, as effectively as she did. She's taken the BFC through, and, as a result, all the fashion designers that are part of the BFC Foundation, she's taken all of them through the pandemic, Brexit. Like, these are tough periods for designers, and there was a lot of budget building and allocation that was happening during these times. The London Fashion Week went digital, of course. Like, all of those kind of changes, the BFC was part of those conversations, making all of those changes around London Fashion Week. It's quite a big endeavor, and I'm really interested to see who is going to be taking the reins and whether there'll be a shift in the direction. The BFC has been criticized in the past as well for not supporting young designers enough. The thing with the London showrooms in Paris, like, that was always something that a lot of young designers depended on to get in front of international buyers. For a couple of seasons, that was kind of taken away from them, and that was quite a big issue. Now they've been brought back as of this season. So now, London's designers will also be able to get in front of, Parisian buyers and press. And I think that will have quite a big impact. So I'm wondering if there's going to be a little bit of a shift, perhaps some new direction, a little bit of freshness in that. On the kind of criticism side of things, there's a couple of digital components that, the BFC could probably get into more. And, while the kind of funding side is really important, I think that, making the London Fashion Week almost like a embedded part of British or London life would be really interesting. I think there's more that can be done there to engage people, like, socially, and what's happening with London Fashion Week and make it more of a cultural moment.
Yeah, for sure. And one thing that you, I think, talked about with Caroline is the idea that because of the closure of like Farfetch and Matches Fashion, that British brands have a little bit of a harder time getting in front of wholesale and getting in front of buyers. In the US, we talk a lot about how the importance for a young brand or a young designer of getting in like Nordstrom or Saks, although Saks will then just not pay you. But you know what I mean? Like, getting into some of these big department stores can be a real benefit for a younger brand. And it feels like British designers either have to go to a few kind of like big ones like Selfridges or Harrods, or look internationally, like you said, like to Paris buyers. Do you think that's the case for British designers, that it's tougher to get into wholesale?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, those platforms kind of also were distinctly British. And so obviously they were based here. A lot of the times that meant that, British designers almost, wouldn't say got priority, but there was definitely a more of an interest in featuring them as a result. And I don't think that that's been happening as much when you think about the international stage, because obviously there's so many designers competing in that when you're thinking about, not just Paris, but obviously like Germany's got a fashion week, Tokyo, in China as well. Like all of those designers that are featuring there are getting the attention from these international buyers and from wholesale partners. So it's quite a tough spot to be in. And, there's a lot of designers that are coming out of the UK. So I think there's more focus on that. But there's also, like a lot of these designers have now kind of focused on building individual collaborations. Nancy Dojaka, she's had a partnership this season with Calvin Klein. Most of the pieces for now have sold out, and it feels like it's quite a good organic kind of partnership. There's a similarity in terms of, both of them doing more underwear inspired pieces. And she's got a very kind of refined aesthetic that I think lends well to the brand. So I'm wondering if there's going to be more of that approach with individual brands, kind of similarly to what is happening with New York Fashion Week. There's a couple of mainstay brands, especially in that kind of mass market sector, Crocs, Birkenstocks. I think Roxanne did a collaboration with FitFlop as well. Like all of these kind of accessories partners are providing quite a lot of that creative, collaborative backbone, I guess, that's needed for London.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you for the report from London Fashion Week. You did some great work there. Let's talk very quickly about, so Milan is ongoing right now. There's 2 shows I wanted to just quickly mention, and then we'll talk about things we're excited to see at Paris. But I think the 2 big ones at Milan so far that got a lot of acclaim were Marni and Fendi, both of which showed early in the week and had some really cool designs and also just a cool looking show. I particularly liked the Marni show. Francesco Rizzo often collaborates with Dev Hynes on the music. And I think having original music is very cool. And also I'm a huge fan of Dev Hynes and Blood Orange. So it's very cool that they work together. And the kind of like these 60s inspired looks at Marni, which I thought was very cool. And then Fendi had their show under the direction of Kim Jones, got a lot of acclaim. And something I love from that is I read an interview with Jones where he was talking about taking inspiration from Mrs. Dalloway, which is a book I love. So I like both of these shows for the clothes, but also because of the sort of outside cultural kind of influences and collaborations that come into it. And I always think that's cool when there's some non-fashion related influences seeping into a show. I don't know. Have you seen anything from Milan that you've been into so far?
Yeah, I think I'm the same. I really like the Fendi show. I think it's actually quite nice when designers keep it quite simple, but also quite light. I felt like the whole collection was quite light, still quite commercial. Some great accessories. Like there was a couple of bag shapes that I was like, oh, that is really, really lovely. But it's just like the general aesthetic didn't feel like it was too overdone. And then on the other side, some of the other shows that I've seen were Boss. I think some of them actually, the Boss one, they featured one of the tennis players, I say Taylor Fritz, on the runway. And Boss has had, an association with sport for quite a while. So I'm interested how they're going to be going into that a little bit further. And then the other one is Fiorucci, which had a bit of a new direction, quite an interesting show format. I think everything was around pillows and duvets and very kind of like sleep orientated softness, which I feel like, again, that whole kind of comfort piece is really appealing to consumers right now. Like at London, just going back for a second, like there were pretty much most of the shows had models in flat footwear, unless they were doing like full gowns like Richard Quinn or something, but pretty much everyone had flat footwear. And I'm wondering if there's like a bigger push into that comfort category for luxury as well.
Yeah. What about Paris? Is there any shows you're looking forward to there?
For Paris, I mean, I would say that Wayne Santo is something that I kind of prefer, like myself, just because they had quite a lot of digital fashion collaborations back in the day, and they still do some interesting things. And Riolage, the Japanese brand, same thing there. And then obviously, the mainstays as well. Like I'm very interested to see Yves Saint Laurent and also what's going to be happening with Dior, just because that's going to be something that's evolving as that kind of luxury conversation carries on. And, they've been kind of under investigation for the supply chain links over the last couple of months. So I'm wondering if that's going to be showing up at all or mentioned anywhere around the runway collection.
Yeah, I'm interested to see those as well. Saint Laurent, Balmain, Dior, obviously all the big ones. I am also interested to see The Row, which is showing in Paris. And then Schiaparelli also will have a show later in the week. And I feel like they've done such cool stuff, not just in their designs, but in their shows as well. I don't know. I always like when designers like take the show seriously and try to like make it unique or memorable or something beyond just here's our clothes, come look at them. But we will be doing some more coverage of both Milan and Paris throughout the next 2 weeks. I'm glad New York is over. It's so fun and I love going, but it's also exhausting. I'm sure you feel the same way about London.
As you can tell by my voice, it was a season. But yeah, very, very excited to see the next couple of weeks of shows. I'm sure there's going to be some really interesting collections coming out. So keeping track.
For sure. Well, thank you for being here, Zofia. For those of you listening, don't forget to give us a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, wherever you listen to this, because that helps us out so much. And don't forget to subscribe to the Glossy podcast, because you'll hear interviews with industry insiders every Wednesday and week interview episodes every Friday. But until the next time, thank you all for listening.